Good evening and welcome to our third session of Speak Up here at Batavia High School. I'm Catherine Hubbard along with Daniel Russo. We're the co-chairs of this engaging committee, and to all of you that have attended all three sessions, your name will be in a drawing for a small sports car with the Speak Up logo emblazoned on the side. So, Speak Up, as you already know, is a community-wide effort to gather input and feedback from our community regarding the future of our Batavia Public Library. Hopefully, you've already filled in the information sign-up sheet at your tables, and make sure that everyone at the table has filled in this sheet. We'll pick those up at the end of the evening or later in the session. This is a calendar of the workshop sessions, and it's also on the library website if you haven't seen it. Our last and fourth session will be Thursday, May 10th, and we'll present what we've heard and ask if we've heard you correctly. So it'll be a kind of a tie-up session for the previous three sessions. All of the information from Speak Up and the documents also will be posted on the library's website. We can also be found on Facebook and Twitter. If you haven't already done so, make sure you like us on the library Facebook page. There will be questions and comments that may or may not be directly related to the topic being discussed, so we've placed an I have a question or a comment sheet on the tables. If you do have a question or a comment and we're not able to answer it during the small group time, write it on one of those sheets and Dan will get back to you on that. Ha ha. Now on to our very riveting topic this evening, stewards of public investment. And our speakers this evening are Christopher Kotra, who's with the Building Technology Consultants Company, and then we'll hear from Joseph McCain, who is with the Finance Department for Batavia Public Library. So our first speaker is Chris, and then he'll be followed by Joe. And then after both of them have spoken, we'll have a short question and answer session, and then that will be followed up by some group activities.
All right. How's everybody doing tonight? My name is Chris Kotra. I'm from Building Technology Consultants. We are a consulting firm specialized in, well, we call ourselves forensic engineers, although that may be a fancy term. We specialize in investigating problems in buildings. We do a lot of different services that you see here. I'm not going to go in depth in that. But one of the things that we do in particular are capital asset studies. I'm not sure if you're familiar with those are, but we're going to go into some detail on what that is, why we did it, and why it's a benefit. Let's talk about Batavia Library, which is why we're here today. So just to summarize the building itself, it was built in 2001, opened to the public in 2002. There's 54,000 square feet of usable space in the building, which is a very good sized library. So there's brick, cast stone facade, aluminum frame windows, several different steep slope roofs, a lot of site work components. And the reason I bring up and kind of list all these items specifically is because these are all things that need to be taken care of as part of your facility. So the library functions as a place to provide materials and services to meet lifelong learning needs. It's also a welcoming place to gather, exchange ideas, participate in cultural events, and it's also meant to evolve to meet ever-changing community needs. And I think that's one of the reasons why you all are here today, to try to keep progressing, keeping with the times and making sure the library functions as what you want it to be as your community investment. So how do you achieve that function or maintain it? One of those steps is definitely being proactive versus reactive. There's the strategy of planning for the worst and hoping for the best. And then having dedicated staff and trustees that are looking out for the best interests of the building. So we've been involved with the Batavia Public Library since about 2012. We were asked to investigate some small water leakage issues, and then after that, we we've been kind of held on to do a few other things, including a schematic design for some site repairs. And then that took us a little further with a full design, bidding assistance, and then we oversaw the construction process as well. And then most recently, we did the capital asset study for the library. That was completed last year, and that's the main focus of why we're here tonight, is to kind of talk about what we did, why we did it, where we're going. So what is a capital asset study, also known as a reserve study? It's a review of all the building systems that have a predictable life and that will require some sort of funding to repair or replace somewhere down the road. It's really meant to be a 30,000-foot overview of all the building systems and bring that all together to map out a plan for future expenditures, a 20-year plan. It's important to point out it's really only one option. Obviously, funding is fluid, a lot of variables with cash flow. So it is really meant to be a snapshot, and it's something that needs to be updated periodically based on how things progress with the building itself. So why perform one? Well, it establishes, first and foremost, it establishes an inventory of all the building components you have. Second, it kind of creates a roadmap for future expenses. It can also help with preparing budgets, avoiding surprises, again, taking the proactive approach to building maintenance, and avoiding the additional costs of deferred maintenance. So the scope of work for putting together a capital asset study are these basic elements. So the background review is where we look at, or we compile general information about the building, review all documents that have been available, whether that's original design drawings or reports that have been done along the way. We go through with the library staff and talk about, things that may have required unusual maintenance in the past. We discuss goals of major rehabilitation or ideas of going forward, and then the financial information as well. Then the field assessment is the next part, and probably, you could argue all these parts are the most crucial part, but the field assessment is where we physically come out to the site and look at all these systems and evaluate not only what they are, but what their condition is specific to that building, in order to get better gauge what kind of useful life they have remaining and how that interacts with everything else and all the other systems around it. Then there's the financial analysis part, and then we also met with the library staff to present our findings, and then we finalized everything with a report. So in order to use it as a functional tool, we group things into several different categories, these being the categories site elements, roofing, facade, interior finishes and fixtures, which also includes technology, and then there's elevators, and then all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection systems as well. So just to give you a brief overview of what was included in the site elements, a lot of these items, I won't read all of those, but basically when I'm saying site elements is anything outside this building. What did I just do?
Took the 30,000-foot view.
I did. I don't know what I did. Oh, there we go. We got it back. I don't know what I did. Sorry about that. So yeah, the library is responsible for maintaining all these items out here, which is a large plot of land. So you've got lots of parking lot, which is something that they're going to be undertaking later this year. And then there's site walls, site lighting, sidewalks, landscaping, all these things that need to be maintained to the life of the building. And roofing. There's a lot of different roofing systems on the building. There's steep slope shingles with gutters, and then there's the low slope areas. There's also a metal seam roof. And there's all these other components like the chimney. And I bring up this next picture to kind of emphasize the point of deferred maintenance. Now, something like this is just an open sealant joint, not necessarily a huge deal in itself, but letting something like that go could lead to something like this, where you have leaks inside the building and you have to repair interior finishes. So now, not only do you have the cost of repairing the outside, but you've added the cost and this is just an example of why deferred maintenance can be an issue. And the idea of staying proactive is how you avoid these types of costs.
Is that us?
It is, this is a separate, this actually, these aren't related. This is something different. There was a leak in the cupola, but it's been resolved. But it was just meant to be an example of things that can happen. Facade, all the things that grouped in there are the brick masonry, the cast stone, the windows, the doors, the column covers at the front. I just have some pictures of that as well, kind of grouping everything together. And when I bring up the field assessment, it's an important feature because it's not just meant to be a cookie cutter example. Okay, you have a roof, it's going to last 20 years. That's it. There's more to it. It's looking at specific conditions on what your building is and how it relates to all the other systems and how, for instance, up here, this is a roofing issue that may be contributing to this, which may be accelerating the deterioration of the facade. So these are all things tied together that you want to, look at as a big picture and a little bit closer to understand what are the things that are going to need some maintenance down the road. And you see missing sealant in some of these areas, and these are things that need to be maintained, and we have to plan for larger, facade repairs and all these types of projects. These are the other types of things we look at. Like this is evidence of water leakage inside a window. So in that case, we know something is a problem that we may have to address sooner rather than later. So all the interior finishes and fixtures also got grouped into one category. That also includes the technology and equipment for things like the phone system or the RFID. All these things are tied together. Again, I just have a few pictures just showing some of the interior finishes, whether that be carpeting, shelving, ceiling finishes, furniture, flooring materials, even the restrooms need upgrades periodically. And honestly, those are some of the things that need to be upgraded the most frequently. And even some of the staff areas as well, those need periodic upgrades to maintain a comfortable work environment, and just there's a lot of wear and tear that goes into operating a library in the back rooms. Elevators are another system that need to be maintained. Not a huge issue in Batavia Public Library given the age, but there are certainly things that need to be planned for somewhere in the near future. And then there's all the mechanical systems. I actually do want to point out, we're not experts in all systems. And if anybody tells you that, they're either delusional or lying, one of the two, or both maybe. So we by no means think we're experts in every single system in the building. So a lot of times for mechanical systems, we bring in a mechanical consultant to help us with those systems, which he did for this case. So Elara Engineering helped us out with all the mechanical, electrical, plumbing, and fire protection systems. Some very exciting pictures of some of the mechanical systems. All right, so that takes us to the analysis part of the capital asset study. I know you can't read this, but this is just meant to be a snapshot of, this is one of the first tables we have in the report. The gist of it, it's a snapshot of everything. So here's every system broken down with all the categories that I just spoke about. It gives a brief description, very brief, a one-word description saying what the current condition of that component is. It says poor, good, fair to good. And then there's a typical useful life and a remaining useful life, estimated unit costs. This is a quick reference table that usually kicks off the financial part of the report. So for just an example, I pulled up the roofing and some of the mechanical stuff. Many of those components have a very definite life. So I wanted to kind of focus on those just to show you why things are coming up where they are. Just just to kind of show you, a lot of these things have 25 to 30-year lifespans, or 15 to 25, or, there's a big range of items in there in both of these, the roofing and the MEP stuff. The library is 17 years old now. So a lot of these things you're starting to see with the 4, 5, 10 years, you're starting to see those things in the near future. So these are all things that need to be planned for, so there are no surprises along the way. Yes, sir.
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No problem.
Maybe I missed it. Is this a study that you just recently did
Yes, we completed it last year.
or last year?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so here's a snapshot of one of the tables. It kind of maps out, I know it's tough to read, I'm going to do another blow up as well, but this is just a summary of, just for the first 5 years as an example, and we keep these tables, it's a 20-year study, so there's 4 of these tables essentially. This is present day. We also do it as inflated costs. We do both different tables to see the differences. And just to blow up, say on like the site elements here, you start planning for these things in the next 5 years, these things tend to add up very quickly. So back to this table, just as an example, that's, $2.8 million worth of stuff in this first 5 years of all the systems. So the idea is to come up with a plan to fund those, to plan for those big projects. This is kind of a map out of that entire 20-year period showing what those expenses are going to be, what the anticipated annual expenses are going to be. So you can see it's kind of a roller coaster ride, and there's a lot of big ticket items coming up in the next 5 years. That levels off towards the end, but one thing to note is that these cycle back again. So a lot of these big ticket items that happen here are going to happen just outside of this study again. So these things they're cyclical, so they need to be, you need to maintain a budget. You can't just spend all your money here and then be good. Oh, I hit that same button again, sorry. Maybe I'm going to stop using the pointer. So this is a table showing, so the red line is how the reserves are currently trending. If all these items that we've addressed, that I've pointed out recently here, are all undertaken, then this is the trend of that. And then we put together a recommended funding plan that keeps this level. And we'll go through that now. And Joe's actually going to go a little bit more detail on what this graph represents, actually. So here's the funding plan we put in tabular form to come up with a plan to keep the reserves at a healthy balance, throughout the duration of the period, and planning for other things that are cycling back right after the end of the period. So here's a graphical representation of the same thing, just showing the funding plan that we came up with. It's a big bump, and then it's leveling off for the remainder of the period to tackle some of these high price items early on. And this is kind of the summary of both, where it's showing what the reserve balance would be at the end of each year. As you can see with this plan, it ends up with a nice healthy balance at the end, which again starts the cycle for other things down the road. There's all 3 of those tables put together. And so the last part of the capital asset study is just the report, summarizing everything, which that just includes, like I said, a summary, analysis, the assumptions, and we also have component summary category reports for each one of those categories that I mentioned up front. Within that, there's a description and quantities for each of the assets, the current condition, the approximate rehabilitation costs and schedule, and we also include maintenance recommendations. Now, that's not a reserve expense, but that's also ways that you might be able to extend some of these items at lower cost by just maintenance instead of full replacement or large-scale repairs. And then there's also representative photographs included with that, and the financial tables. With that is all I have. Does anybody have any questions for me now, or do you want to wait till after Joe goes?
Do you know off the top of your head what the huge bump in 2020 is caused by? That's up to $1 million.
There are some interior stuff. There's technology involved in that. I forgot exactly what that is. I'd have to look it up. I don't remember off the top of my head, but there are several things coming up very soon, actually. Roof is another one of those that's in the next several years, yeah.
Roof usually is 20 years.
It can be. It should be, put it that way. A lot of times, the way things are, it all depends on how things are detailed and how things come together and how it's maintained. Sometimes that it gets shorter. Other times, it can last longer than that. But yeah, usually 20 years is a good benchmark.
Did you do the field study?
Yes.
Was there any one area that really caused you great concern?
Well, the parking lot, that was one that was probably in the worst shape. But I think we knew, we had a pretty good idea that was coming anyways. The roof is getting there.
Really?
Yeah, it's not too far away. I think windows might be a concern at some point. That was actually part of our evaluation a while ago. So I think we know there are issues there. It's a matter of planning for large-scale repairs. And I know there are a lot of technology upgrades that are coming very quickly here. Some systems that are becoming obsolete, that they're almost being forced into changing. Other systems are just to be able to keep up with the times. I mean, otherwise,
Constant.
right, exactly.
We will do,
Plan out somewhere where we can see it in more detail?
I believe so.
Because I know you've had it on the screen and it was kind of hard to read. I mean, is it on the website somewhere or would we have access to that?
Oh, it was,
Not yet, but it
it,
could.
the reason it's not on the website now is because it was such a big file
Okay.
that we couldn't do it as a PDF, so we may have to break it into pieces. But yeah, we'll make sure it gets.
I would just be curious because we couldn't see everything.
Sure, no, I know, this is a quick flip through, I understand that, but yeah, if it's available, it'd be a lot easier to,
Would there be any plan to, as the roof is being replaced, continue to use more metal or aluminum or steel roofing, or at least parts of the roof to, if you can't do the thing in its entirety, if you can do at least parts of it at a time, because the difference in the useful life of it is so much different. You can see it even on this.
oh, yeah,
50-plus years as opposed to 25 maximum for the other ones.
right.
So,
But-
if the cost is double, you would amortize it over.
Well, right, I mean, that's the key, it's the high initial cost versus the overall cost, it's your life cycle cost, right, exactly.
Is there any plan to do any of that?
Well, I think once it comes time to replace the roof, I think the library should probably get a consultant involved, whether that's us or somebody else, but to make sure they're getting the best system for what they're trying to accomplish. I think that should be step one of whoever's doing that, to make sure.
If you can't do the whole roof, then do parts of it anyway.
Right, no, I think that's a legitimate option. I think the library should consider that if that's on the table.
we'll do more questions, but Joe now is gonna talk
Yeah.
about library finances.
Which way is, hey, Chris, which way is forward, actually, on this one?
This one.
This one forward, okay. Good evening, and thank you for attending. I'm Joe McCain. I'm a finance individual at the library. Tonight, I'm going to concentrate on the library budget and how it is developed, income sources and how they are determined, expense categories, savings for the future by additions to reserves, and future capital needs and how to pay for them. There is a handout at your table that you can follow along if you'd like to do that. The key to financial responsibility is to develop a balanced budget. That is one of our librarians. The first step in building a balanced budget is to determine the income for the year. Because the revenue of the district is 95% property tax, identifying this revenue early is an important first and crucial step. One of the challenges in developing the income side of the budget has been the decrease over several years of the equalized assessed value of the taxable property within the district. There was a dramatic decline from fiscal year 12 to fiscal year 16 of about 15%. That has only in the last several years reversed direction. King County determines the taxing body's tax rate that is applied to the assessed values to determine the property tax income for our fiscal year. And this is an example of the effect of the library's tax rate on a particular property for the last 7 or 8 years, including the current year coming up. Once the amount of the tax levy is known in March each year, the annual operating budget for the next fiscal year is developed for approval by the Board of Trustees. There are several categories of income that are projected, but as noted, the income is derived principally from property tax. Other sources include fines, fees, grants, interest, and other. After income is identified and estimated, the expense side of the budget is developed. The daily operating expense budget, excluding capital and debt costs, includes personnel expense, about 2/3, collections, 16%, and other operating expenses such as utilities, office supplies, et cetera, et cetera. Also included in the budgeting process is an amount equaling 4% of income for transfers to reserves at the completion of the fiscal year. And because the library has budgeted conservatively over the years, at the end of the year, excess income has been transferred into reserves or savings accounts. In most years, the amount saved in operations and transferred has exceeded 2%. This has permitted the library to build some necessary reserves that we are dependent on for a downturn in the economy, parking lot resurfacing, new roof, new carpet, et cetera, et cetera.
Can you go back just a second?
Sure.
What, you said 4%, I thought 4% was kicked into the reserves every year.
Beginning this fiscal year that we're in, we budget 4% of the income for the year going into the reserves. In a number of past years, it has exceeded that. So
Okay, what was the 2% number you threw out?
that was an original number. That started, I don't know how many years ago, and had been 2%. So when you look at these numbers, that's roughly only 2%. In this year, it's doubled.
Okay,
So
how
we'll
long
start-
have you been at the level of 4%?
Just this year, the first year.
It's the first year?
Correct.
Prior to this, it's always been 2%?
That is correct.
Wow. Do you anticipate staying at that 4% now going forward?
You'd have to ask the board. That was a board direction. The library has 4 reserve funds that would be available for contingencies and for capital needs. The library fund reserves, the blue line, is from excess results of operation and is intended as a rainy day fund. The balance of $833,000 is about 3 to 4 months of operating expenses. The building maintenance fund reserves, the red line, is a result of excess results from day-to-day maintenance of the building, equipment, and grounds. Reserves are intended for building needs that are not major capital projects. The balance is about $271,000. The gold line, working cash fund reserves. This is originally set up through property tax. The balance may only be used for borrowing if property tax receipts are late. And the balance currently is $205,000. And the silver line along the top, special reserve fund reserves, transfers from the library fund at the end of each year. The use of funds is restricted for capital building-related purposes, and this has been the source of funds for significant building projects. The library has had several years of significant capital costs. Chris alluded to several of those, as it begins to determine how to fund the future needs of the library in a now 17-year-old building. The library recently completed the capital asset study that has determined the most likely future capital needs and estimated timeline for future capital costs. Both the costs and the timing are educated estimates based on the BTC capital asset study. And these are the cost estimates, very similar to what you saw in the previous display. The money to pay for these capital costs will need to come from the Special Reserves Fund. This is the fund that receives at a minimum 4% of income annually for capital cost purposes. the current projected additions to reserves compared to the projected capital expenses reflects a significant and growing gap between income and expense beginning in the next several years. Beginning in the year that starts July 1st, 2019, that's a year out, the library will no longer have bond expenses. The final payments of principal and interest will be made December the 30th, 2018, in the next fiscal year. The current tax rate providing tax income for the bond expense is 0.074 of the assessed valuation. Potentially, this level of tax rate could generate approximately $656,000 in tax revenue for future capital needs. Time for questions.
So that's 7 cents per hundred? 7 cents?
Correct. The assessed valuation, correct. Yes.
The chart that had the 4 lines with the 4 reserve accounts, I was just confused. It looked like one was at, if I look at the last column there for 17, you've got, is it the case that there were 800,000 in one account and roughly 5 or 6 in the other one? Can you sum that up? Is that
The top, the blue dot is about 833,000. The silver dot is at about, what did I say?
But would you sum that up to say our total reserve is 800,000 plus 600,000 plus 250 plus?
I didn't do it that way because the 4 categories have to be used a little bit differently.
Okay.
So the special reserve one is intended for the capital, major capital projects. The building maintenance fund has a balance in it from just surpluses over the year, if I can use that term. And that really is used for non-capital. In other words, as an example, pothole in the parking lot, that's out of the maintenance fund. Replace the whole thing is out of reserves. Shingles off the roof, that's out of the maintenance fund. The whole roof is capital. So that one gets restricted for that purpose too.
So, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just saying, the one chart that started at, above 0 and then went down over the next 10 years, which of those 4 lines did that number start at? What's that one at?
That is,
Just to connect the 2 charts.
that's the difference between expense and revenues for the special reserves. So if I project out what we're going to be doing going into the future. Now, in fact,
Right, but in just that point, just the first one. that
Correct.
Should line up, maybe off by year, with one of those 4 lines on the
Right.
previous chart, right? Am I understanding it right, or am I?
Right, yeah, you're.
well, yes and no, in that it's fiscal year 18, current fiscal year, so it's not complete. So in fact, if we tried to push it back, we could get it back to that
Because
point.
you've got to 17
Correct.
and you're projecting
Right.
18, but is it one of those 4 lines or is it some
Correct.
combination of those?
No, it's that one line,
Which
the
one is
gold,
that?
the gold one.
Okay.
Are you forbidden from?
Okay, the gold one that the 200,000 level.
Silver.
I'm sorry, silver.
Silver one is the
Silver.
600.
Yeah.
Okay.
Too much
Thank you.
gold.
Thank you. That helps me.
Okay,
Yeah.
sure.
Are you forbidden from transferring money from one fund to the other?
Monies can be transferred, and if I start to slip off, George can step in. We can transfer monies from the library fund into other funds. The working cash fund cannot be used for anything other than borrowing if the tax receipts are late. I think that's something more typical maybe in Cook County, not in Kane. Kane pays their taxes right on the button. The building maintenance fund is really intended for that, and I don't know specifically if stuff can go.
I think it's legal under library law to transfer monies from other funds into the library fund.
Okay,
And then money from the library fund can be transferred into
Out.
any of the other funds.
okay,
But everything has to go through the library fund.
all right,
But the working cash fund, by law, if we spend any of that money, which is highly restricted, but it's possible to spend during the building construction project, I believe that fund was used for some of the expenses 16, 17 years ago, but we were required to pay it back into that fund. So quickly after the referendum passed in '02 to increase the operating cost for the library, that money would be paid. Someone who knows more about that is actually. Okay, so that one is probably the most restricted. When we did nearly $1 million project with all the columns and sidewalks and steps and all those things outside, we actually took money from the special reserve fund, and we transferred some money. We had an excess in the library fund reserve at that
Okay.
point, more than we felt we needed to have. So the board authorized moving some of that money through the library fund back into the special reserve fund. So those two funds help pay for
Okay.
that $1 million. So that's why the balance is so low. At one point, it was nearly $1 million in that fund.
So, if the budget is around 3.5 million this year, this fiscal year, I guess roughly 3.5, and you want to put 4% of that into the reserve fund, right?
It's about
That's
120,000
roughly
budget this year.
120,000.
Correct.
How is that 120,000 distributed among the four funds?
It goes straight into the building reserve fund.
The special reserve.
Special reserve, I'm sorry.
It goes straight into the silver fund.
So how are the other reserve funds funded then?
The working cash fund, the only way it can be funded at this point is through interest accruals.
Really?
There's a cap on the amount. That's a formula that's in the law. And we actually were at the cap, was $193,000 several years ago. And the state law was changed, which actually raised the cap slightly. So the only way we can fund that is well, we could take money from our operating budget and stick it in there, but that actually is taking money we could use and putting it someplace, like putting it in the bank. So right now, we're just letting the interest accrue until it hits the new cap. The building reserve fund is a 2-cent levy on top of our regular library fund levy that the board authorizes each year. And anything we don't spend in there stays in there, so that's the reserve for that. And the same with the library fund. Anything that's not used or transferred to the special reserve fund stays there. So that's funded from unspent balances.
Right.
So the 3 to 4 month amount for the rainy day fund, that's probably industry average,
It varies from library to library, but I think that's pretty standard.
is it?
And at one point, the reason we took money out of that fund for the capital improvements, I think we had like 6 or 7 months worth, and but by evaluating, it was one of those things where it just had accumulated, and we looked at it every year, but it was like we reconsidered. I think at one point the standard we had chosen years and years ago was maybe 6 months. We realized that was way more than we needed to have, so we recalculated that.
How often do you have to take money out of that fund?
The library
The
fund?
operating.
There are several separate little, do you have that chart of different funds?
No.
What was the chart that showed?
IMRF, all the others.
Was that the budget chart?
Oh, it was there, you're right. Oops.
Or did I-
There.
Yeah. These are the various funds that are authorized by state law. So the library fund is our general fund, our operating fund. IMRF is Illinois Municipal Retirement Fund, is a retirement system in Illinois. FICA, of course, is Social Security and Medicare payments. Building maintenance is the one fund we're talking about. Risk management is basically the insurance tort fund. And then we have a small fund for audit. So some of these have very small levies, like a 1 cent or 1.5 cent or things like that. If any of those if we have an unexpected expense in any of those that was not anticipated in the budget process, we're allowed at the end of the fiscal year to make them whole by transferring money out of the library fund.
Makes sense.
It doesn't happen very often, but it has happened over the past decade, maybe 3 times or so.
So of those 1, 2, 3, 4, of those 5, probably maintenance is the largest?
Well, the library fund is the largest,
Well,
but
yeah,
building
besides
maintenance.
that, of those five that are 100%.
Yeah, the
Yes.
building maintenance would be the
Yeah.
second largest. That has a 2-cent levy, and we use it pretty much every year. All the
Yeah.
maintenance contracts, service contracts. Do we put snow removal and things in there, or is it?
Basically, everything except utilities goes through there.
Which makes sense for operating.
The audit fund is the smallest
Are you audited every year?
every year.
So you have a question?
Where's the books budget?
Well, that's in the library fund.
Oh, that's in the library.
It's under collections.
Definitely naive when it comes to this stuff. But are the funds invested in earning income, or are they just sort of sitting there?
They are, our funds are invested through the state of Illinois, but before you've grown.
Yeah.
Through the state treasurer's office, they have a system called Illinois funds. And actually, Illinois funds are earning better interest than you can find anywhere else in this area. In fact, Joe, what is the rate now? Because the rate has increased over the last couple of years tenfold, the interest rate.
Yeah.
So, but that's only like $13,000 a year, so don't get too excited about that. But yes, we are earning interest. Like the working cash fund, that's how we're increasing the balance, and that a little bit each year is the interest.
Any other questions about the capital asset plan or for Joe?
All right.